My name is Sam. I'm the Partnerships and Communications Manager here at Fairygodboss. And if you didn't already know, Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women. Our mission is to improve the workplace by increasing transparency, and we offer a ton of great free resources to help you in your careers, like anonymous company reviews, job listings, articles, virtual recruiting events, and so much more. So before we get things started today, we will be taking questions at the end of today's session. So you'll find that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to leave any questions that come to mind. You can leave them as yourself or anonymously, so don't be shy. And you can leave any comments you have during the webinar in the chat. You'll find that again at the bottom of your screen. So the webinar will also be recorded today and sent out in a follow-up email by the end of the day. So if you miss anything, you have to jump out early, you'll be able to rewatch it back at any time. Here with me today is Beth Caldwell. Beth is the author of more than 10 books on leadership, inspiration, and personal development. She believes that women can do it all, just not at the same time. She's the founder and creator of the Shift program and Leadership Academy for Women. Her newest book, which just came out very recently, is called Women Lead, and it includes more than 100 strategies for being an influential leader at home, at work, and in the community. Thanks so much for being here today, Beth. Over to you.
Hi, Samantha. Thank you for having me. Hi, everybody, and welcome. Happy May the 5th. Glad to be here. I was chatting with Sam just before, and she's in New York, and I'm in Pittsburgh. And I was supposed to be in New York at Barnes & Noble signing my book today. So I just feel like it's all going to work out. And if I were there, I wouldn't be able to be here with you today. So I'm glad to be here. So today we're going to talk about conflict in the workplace, virtual or in person. And I want to give you a little disclaimer. First of all, I have a lot to say. I talk really fast. So lean in and make sure you have your pen or your favorite way to take notes. And just a warning for you, we're going to talk about overcoming conflict today. So awkward conversations and rapid progress may occur immediately, as they often do when we face the challenges that we have. So there are a lot of people here today who don't know me. Let me give you a brief update. My name is Beth Caldwell. I'm located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And since 2009, I have been the host of Leadership Academy for Women here in my hometown. And my newest book is called Women Lead. And with the release of that book this year, for the first time ever, Leadership Academy is open to anybody. Instead of meeting in an office, we're going to now be meeting virtually. And funny thing, we had planned that in March before all this happened. So I'm a writer and a speaker. You see Steve Harvey there on the screen. I was very blessed to be able to travel with him around the country and be one of the teachers in the Steve Harvey Success Institute. I have a blog on Thrive Global. If you like self-improvement and motivation, look for me there. And these are two of my books on leadership, Smart Leadership, and my newest one called Women Lead. I'm so excited about that gold cover. It's so much more feminine, and I really love having it. I have, you can't see it, but my computer, I got a gold cover for my computer and a gold cover for my phone. So they kind of match the book. So I've been really having fun with that gold. The day that the book came out, I even had gold fingernails. So that was cool. So let's talk about conflict. Now, I want to begin with all of you women who want to be confident communicators and really don't want this conflict and drama to be draining your days at work. This is one of the biggest problems that we have at work. So let's just pause for a minute and think about what's necessary to be an excellent leader. The women that I work with in my Leadership Academy, we have 4 essentials. These are things that you may already be masters at or things that you may want to work on. And essentially, an excellent leader, whether it's a male or a female, makes fast and competent decisions. They don't drag out decision making because they're worried about what people will think. Effective and influential leaders figure out how to cope with criticism. And let me tell you, that's something I have struggled with for years. So I have some tips for you on that today. An effective leader will communicate confidently. So I want you all to look as confident as the woman in this picture. And you're not afraid of handling awkward situations. They're so tricky, aren't they? And don't we all want to avoid those awkward situations? So an exceptional leader will handle those awkward situations and not let them waste your time. So one of the first strategies that I want to share with you today, I got this from my coach about 10 years ago when I hired a business coach. And I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to be very, very hard on myself when things don't go my way, when things aren't perfect, when they don't move as fast as I want them to, or when I'm just disappointed at the outcome of something. Like, for example, my book tour being canceled, right? I learned this strategy, isn't that interesting, about 10 years ago. And I think it is what has one of the things that have really helped me to be able to cope with change and drama and conflict. And that's the phrase, isn't that interesting? Friends, that's a really neutral term. So what I see with my clients and what used to be true of myself, sometimes is even today, is when something doesn't go our way or when somebody's creating drama, when we're disappointed about something, we say things like, why didn't this work? Why does he speak to me that way? Why is she so overreactive? This is so frustrating. These are the type of things that we say to ourselves, or something like, I should have known better. I can't believe I did this again. When you find yourself talking to yourself in that way, I want you to change that phrase to this phrase. Isn't that interesting? Here's an example from my own personal life. I made a commitment that I was not going to say yes to every opportunity, and I just said yes to 2 things that I really don't want to do. Isn't that interesting? That's a pattern of saying yes over and over again. Or, boy, he's really overreacting about having to put our sales program on a webinar. You could say, why is he so difficult? Why do I have to work with him? Or you could say, isn't that interesting? The thing about this term, isn't that interesting, is that there's no emotion attached to these words. When we say things like, why did I, why didn't I, why is he, this keeps happening, this is so frustrating, that brings emotions into a kind of what could be a neutral situation. So this is a fantastic leadership skill, and it's so simple to add these 3 words to your vocabulary, to the way that you talk to yourself. And when conflicts come up, instead of getting upset, you can pause and say, isn't that interesting? When your mind is in that type of a space, it's easier for you to come up with solutions or even figure out what's causing the problem. So when I wrote my book, Women Lead, I did a lot of research. And one of the things that I like to do is help the women that I work with be more productive and get more done. These are the most common workplace issues that I have found that my clients deal with. And it's also been reported in a number of polls that companies give. Workplace issues, the most common thing that women complain about, it's not bullying. Bullying is at the top of some of the lists. Women complain about constant interruptions, miscommunications. I said this, she heard that. He said this, I heard that. Miscommunication. Gossip seems to really irritate and a lot of the women leaders that I work with, and it really wastes a lot of time. It also brings down productivity, along with drama, immaturity, competitiveness, and bullying. And I've been pretty active on the Fairygodboss chat boards lately, and I'm seeing a lot of people talking about drama and immaturity. You know, we're in a time of a pandemic, and anytime that there's a stressful situation, it will bring out the worst in many people, brings out the best in a lot of people, but for a lot of people, we see their worst side. And so this is something that we're really seeing come up in a lot of workplaces today. So what's the cost of all this? If you're a leader or a manager, you are seeing a big cost of this. Just for all of us, a lot of this conflict is causing us to lose up to 3 hours a week. We're losing our productivity because of all of the drama, constant interruptions, miscommunications. For the business owner or for somebody who's managing a department, you're losing profits. Let's just imagine you have 10 people in your department. And all of them are losing 3 hours a week to just not doing things as well as we could. That's 30 hours of productivity that you've lost. A lot of times today, we are losing quality staff. When you have a workplace that is full of conflict, people will not stay with you. They will find a more positive place to work. And it's really expensive to replace people. To continually train and replace people is expensive, and it keeps your business from moving forward. It's a really expensive cost to not dealing with this. And sometimes if you avoid conflict because you don't want to have a difficult conversation, I see this with a lot of older male clients. They don't want to have a conflict. They don't want to have a difficult discussion, and they keep ignoring situations until they get into the point of where people are quitting, they're starting their own businesses, or they're suing the company. So you have legal fees, fines, and even litigation, all because you have avoided dealing with conflict. And by the way, these tips will help you at home. But when you think about working and where you spend most of your day and your week, what kind of place would you rather work at? We know that people will go to a positive workplace and take a pay cut in order to have a more pleasant environment. So where would you rather work? And wouldn't it be nice if we could get rid of some of these conflicts just by having a conversation? So I have a lot to share with you today. I told you I was going to give you about 5 different strategies. So I have them put in here, I think, from easiest to most difficult. So one of the biggest complaints that I get from women leaders is constant interruptions. And that is causing them to not get their work done during the day and having to take work home and doing it in the evenings and on the weekends. And so I want to give you a couple of really practical tips to how to handle some of these interruptions. So first, set up some boundaries. A lot of times we're interrupted constantly because we're constantly available. Now, I get a lot of criticism for this, but I'm sticking to it. I do not think that everybody needs to have a constant open door policy. I think that you can close your door part of the day and still be available and still be an interactive leader, but you do need some space to get your work done. Now, if you work in a cubicle, there's some different ways that we can do that. I worked as a social worker in a cubicle for many years. So that was so bad for my productivity, you guys, because I'm so social and there was always distractions when I worked in a cubicle. But there's a couple of ways that you can set up some boundaries. Let's say, for example, you're working at home at your kitchen table now, okay? So you don't actually have a door to close. Here are some ways that you can set up some boundaries. So let's start. Let's pretend like you are in your office and you're working in your office and there are other people in the office. Some boundaries that you can set are, hey, from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. or from 1 to 3, my door is shut so that I can get some work done. And you say that in a very pleasant way. Hey, you guys, I've got a really big project I need to finish. I'm going to shut my door from 1 to 3. If you can hold off on your interruptions until then. Now, if you've trained people around you that they can interrupt you all the time, they're still going to come in your door between 1 and 3. So if that happens, I'll put a sticky note up on my door. Do not disturb with a smiley face, right? We don't want people to think that we're being arrogant or hostile or aggressive about this, but set up some boundaries. Now, if you're working at home, a rule that I had when my kids were teenagers was if I was working, so I'm a writer, and if I'm either writing or I'm giving a talk. Okay, so if I'm giving a talk like this and I have teenagers at home, I have a note on the door that says recording in progress. Oh my gosh, in my early days when I first started working with Steve Harvey, it never failed. I would get on a webinar with hundreds of people from around the country and the UPS guy would bang on the door. Suddenly he wanted a signature, right? So I learned to put notes up on the door, do not disturb, recording in process. I see these things about moms putting up, don't interrupt unless you're bleeding. We don't have to be that way. We can say recording in process or meeting in process. But when I was writing and I was working from home and my teenage boys were at home, we had a rule. And that is if my head was down, meaning if I was typing, That meant I was working, and hold your requests until my head was up. I don't work for more than 1 or 2 hours at a time. And then if I had my headphones on, that meant that I was in a meeting. That was also a head down. I've had some clients that have worked in cubicles, and they can put headphones on even if they are not listening to anything, but that's a signal to the people outside, I'm concentrating, right? So set up some boundaries so that you're not always available. Now, this is a tough one, especially for you overachieving women. Resist the urge to solve other people's problems. Oh my gosh, we can do it so much faster than them though, can't we? But if you solve every problem that comes up in your office, you're going to be constantly interrupted. So, and even at home too, if you teach everybody at home to come to you every time something needs fixed, or every time they need to know, what was their immunization date or where's their birth certificate, you're going to be constantly interrupted. So you want to empower people to solve their own problems. And here's how you can do that. If you've trained people to come to you because you're the smart and fast one on the team, right? And I know you're all overachievers, that's why you're here. When they come to you and say, how do I do this? I'm stuck with that. Instead of getting up from your desk and going and fixing that problem for them, ask them a question. What have you tried? What do you think you should do? That might surprise people. If you have constantly been solving things for them, it will surprise them. But you know what else? It also lets them know that you believe in them and you trust that they can solve the problem on their own. Okay? So one of the ways that you can cut down on interruptions is to empower them to solve their own problems. Ask them with a question. Now, what about this question that we get all the time? Excuse me, do you have a minute? And you're in the middle of something that you would like to finish. So you can say, yes, of course I can help you with that. I'm working on a project right now. Can you come back at 2:30? Yes, I can definitely help you with that. How about tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., right before my 8:15 meeting? Setting up a little bit of boundaries. Or you can say, yes, I can help you with that. How about this? How about if you come back tomorrow and give me 2 things that you think might work, and we'll see if we can fix it by then. So we don't have to be unkind when we're setting up boundaries. And here's a tough one for you too, and I'll have to tell you guys, this one doesn't come easy. If you're somebody who's used to doing everything, learning to delegate, which is really important, but to do it without micromanaging. Even though you can do things really fast, and you've been doing them for a long time in a certain way, doesn't mean that there's not a better, faster way to do it, or that a different way of doing it is okay. I just laugh sometimes when I hear about women who won't let anybody else load up the dishwasher because they like their dishes put in there a certain way, or they don't like anybody to fold the towels because they like them folded a certain way, right? There's more than one right way to fold a towel. And really, if the dishes get clean, isn't that what's most important? Does it really matter which way they're facing? There's so many other things that we could be doing than micromanaging. So try some of those tips and let me know if they work for you. All right? So now here's another picture of a very confident woman. One of the biggest problems that we have in the workplace and at home, and oh my gosh, I don't envy any government leaders today, navigating people through change. We could even change that word right now to navigating people through crisis, because that's what a lot of our leaders, political, corporate, and community leaders are doing right now. And the reason I picked a picture of a super confident woman here is because nobody wants to follow you if you're uncertain. People want to follow people who know where they're going. I think that's what I write. Yeah. People like to follow others who know where they're going. So when there's a change in your office, when there's a change in your home or your community, people don't like change. And that's so interesting. Isn't that interesting? It's so interesting because we live on a planet that is constantly changing. The seasons are changing, the days are changing, we're constant movement. But isn't it interesting that people just like things to be just the way they are, and they never want them to change, right? So when things are changing, it makes people uncomfortable, and that's why we have issues. People are afraid, they're uncomfortable, they feel uncertain. And when you feel that way, you want to follow somebody who knows where they're going. And I have to tell you something, some people, many leaders don't know where they're going, but they act like they do, and that makes everybody feel just a little bit better because somebody's in charge. Most people want to be led. So you who are a leader, you're in the minority, okay? So, and there's a lot expected of leaders. So people like to follow those who know where they're going, but those of us who know where we're going, we get frustrated with people who don't like to be changed, right? And you want to watch that frustrating and use my favorite term, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Susie's such a calm person, and yet she is absolutely flipping out about having to use technology. She's such a competent and calm, normal person. She's really acting out. She's really having some issues. We could be critical of Susie, or we could say, isn't that interesting? Usually bad behavior, anger, drama, conflict, big egos, they come from a fear. They come from a place of uncertainty and fear. So instead of saying, why is that person so difficult? Why is he so awful? Why is she so mean? What you could say is, I wonder what their fear is. You wouldn't say this out loud, you would say this to yourself, right? I wonder what their fear is. So many people today are afraid that they're going to lose their jobs, that they're going to lose their income, that they're not going to be able to pay their rent or their mortgage, they're going to lose their car, that they're not good homeschooling teachers, that they're going to get sick and die. There are so many things that people are afraid of right now, and it's your role as a leader to understand these fears and empathize with them. You have to know yourself pretty well before you can get to do this. And then what you do is you keep everybody facing forward and focused on the big picture. You know what, Susie? I know that technology is really challenging to you. And I know that you don't have a fast-moving internet connection. And I know that these webinars are really overwhelming to you, but it's really important that we keep our business going. It's really important that we keep our business going. What are some ways that we can help to make this easier for you? Isn't that much more effective than just saying, oh, come on, Susie, just get with it, right? That's what we're thinking. I know this is overwhelming. I know this is really stressful for you and it's not what you're used to doing, but it's really important that we master this because we have to keep the company going, okay? You know, I really learned about this in my personal life. I live with all men. I have 3 adult men. You know, my sons are gone now, but when I learned this, I had 2 college-age kids and my significant other who lived in the house. And they're 3 very smart men, intelligent men, emotionally intelligent men. And I noticed the rare times that there would be like a temper outrage. It was always when there was some kind of a threat, worried about a job, worried about a college application, worried about passing a test. It's always fear that brings out the worst in people. Remember that. Keep them facing forward and focused on the big picture. It's never helpful to somebody to say, why are you worried? It's much more helpful to say, this is worrisome, but here's what we have to focus on, okay? Now, if you have a really difficult person, and I have worked in companies, several companies that have brought me in when things are so bad that it's gotten to legal issues where people are threatening to sue the company because of a bully or a difficult situation. These kind of situations, I find that it's really rare that you have somebody that wants to come to work and just ruin the day for everybody. That's usually not a person's intention. It happens. There are some people like that, but for the most part, most people just want to come to work, do a good job, get their paycheck, and live their life, right? But when you have a really difficult situation and you don't take immediate action, what happens is then you're saying that behavior is okay. So let me give you an example. Let's say that somebody criticizes you or embarrasses you in front of a group of people, and you are surprised because you're surprised, you say nothing. Now we've just given silent permission for anybody to criticize us or embarrass us or pick on us in front of a group because we said nothing. So we have to say something as soon as we can. If you're embarrassed, if you're hurt, you can't say it right then, but the next opportunity, hey, that wasn't okay with me. You don't have to be ugly or confrontational about it, but you want to take immediate action when necessary. If this is an employee of yours or somebody who reports to you and they act out in a crazy way that you weren't expecting, you're going to be like, I can't believe that just happened. As soon as you process that, you take immediate action, because when you don't take action, when you don't say something, you're saying it's okay. All right, let's talk about criticism. Coping with criticism. I'll tell you, folks, I'm a sensitive girl. I am a sensitive girl, and I used to get so upset when I would get any kind of criticism, because I'm also a person who has really high standards, and I'm always stretching for excellence. But I'll admit to you, in my 20s and 30s, I was reaching for perfection. So when you're somebody who's reaching for perfection and you get criticized, it can really sting. And I would be put out. I would get some criticism on something. It would sometimes, in my younger days, would upset me for days. And there would be times, like when my first book came out in 2009, when I went on my first book tour. I remember I went to Phoenix, Arizona. It was my first big audience. I think it was about 115 people in the audience. And I can still remember that. It was at the Embassy Suites in Phoenix. And I did really well. And there were about 80 people out of the group. You know how they do those feedback forms? So never does 100% of people fill out those feedback forms. But I think about 80 people filled out the feedback forms, and 78 of them gave me 5 stars. Oh, that was a great presentation. We learned so much. Bring her back again. 2 people gave me, like, one gave me a 2-star and one gave me a 3-star. And one of them said something that wasn't even true. So it wasn't even about me. They said, we didn't really appreciate her selling her package on the stage when I didn't have anything for sale. So it wasn't even about me, yet it still bothered me. And today I can't remember what the other person said. She just didn't resonate with me for whatever reason. And didn't I hyper focus on those 2 bad reviews instead of the 88 really good reviews? Sometimes we just focus on that. And so this is something that I've really had to work on. And these are the strategies that I've learned over the years. Number 1, I struggle with giving you this tip because I don't want you to go around and expect criticism, okay? Because you are all like me. If you're doing your best work, if you're working really hard and you're doing your best, you don't expect to be criticized because you think it's your best. But what I learned about myself is what always upset me about criticism was the surprise. I didn't see it coming. And what happened was, after that trip to Phoenix, and then I went to Columbus, and I went to Dallas, and I went to Denver, and I began to notice that it was always about 2 people in the audience that just weren't happy. They just weren't happy with anything. And as I started to grow my business and I started to have clients, I would notice that it was always 2 people. Didn't matter if it was, 20 people in a room or 200 people in a room. There were always 2 people that were uncomfortable. And then I started noticing, like, book reviews of my peers and clients. None of them were 100% perfect. There's always somebody that has a complaint. So instead of taking it personally, you begin to expect it. Some people, what's that wonderful quote? Even if you're the juiciest, ripest peach, there's always going to be somebody who doesn't like peaches, right? So don't be surprised when you're a leader, when you're out in the front, you can expect criticism. So don't be surprised. Now, whatever it was said, especially if this comes from people we love, right? People who love us the most, sometimes the way they say it is just not in the kindest way, right? Was it intended to hurt you or help you? So sometimes, especially the more successful you become and the more distinguished you are at work, if you're different, if you're getting raises and promotions, you're going to make people uncomfortable. Sometimes you sting them just by being who you are. You make people uncomfortable just by being who you are. Some of them are going to send out a nasty zinger, and that's just intended to hurt you, and it has nothing to do with you. Now, if it was intended to help you, maybe it wasn't said. Usually this comes from a mother, right? Or a father or a brother or sister, and they say it in not the kindest way, and it can hurt our feelings. So then we can just reframe it. Is there any validity to this? Is it true? Is it true? Okay. So when I got the criticism about she sells from the stage, it wasn't true. So if it's not true, there's not something that I can fix. I'll tell you a good criticism that I got a couple of years ago. I was at a leadership conference in Columbus, and it was the same sort of thing. There was about 150 feedback forms, and 148 of them were good, and 2 of them had some feedback. One of them I don't remember. The second one, which is really great success on my part because I used to memorize these, but the second one was actually relevant. And she said, I like the speaker. The topic was good. Her pictures don't show diversity. And you know, at that time, it was really hard to get a diverse stock photo to put on your slides. Like, I have some diversity now. I was like, you know what? She's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. And it's hard to find pictures. All the pictures that you would find back then, earlier in my career, were all very young women, right? Very young, kind of like teenage women that were posed as a businesswoman. It was really hard to get. It's been easier in the years since then to find more diverse pictures, age and race, right? So she's absolutely right. I need to improve on that. I don't know how I'm going to improve on that, but as soon as I can, I'm going to improve on that. So sometimes it's true and sometimes it is helpful. Remember, you make other people uncomfortable. When you make people uncomfortable, they can get zingy. That's an official adjective, zingy, right? Okay, let's take a deep breath. I wish I could see you right now to see your questions, but I see some questions coming in, and I know that we're going to get to those at the end. This is a lot of information to take in an hour, so I hope you're taking notes. And remember, you're going to get the recording, so you can watch this again and focus on the issue that you're having struggle with, or the thing that you want to improve right now. So this is the reason why most of you are here, and that is, how do I have a difficult conversation? How do I address a conflict? Now, the first thing that I want to tell you is, you don't address a conflict when you're emotional. When you're exhausted, when you're depleted, when you're overwhelmed, is not the time to have a conflict conversation, okay? Whether it's with a family member or somebody that you work with. So if something has happened and it's caused you to be emotional, let's process the emotions first. I work with a lot of law firms, and there's one, and if you're a lawyer, you'll agree with me, there's one big dysfunction in the legal field today, and that is we don't show any feelings. We do not cry at work, okay? And that's fine not to cry at work, but that doesn't mean we don't cry, or we don't have sad feelings, or we don't feel worried or hurt or upset. So what you want to do is you want to feel your feelings and process them. Work with a coach or a therapist to process your feelings, depending on how big they are. And once you can be neutral and non-emotional, you use terms like, isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting? Every time I'm up for a promotion, this happens. Process things through, and then you can begin to have a conversation. So I'm going to give you an example now. We're going to pretend like you have some people bickering, just a simple office conflict. They don't agree politically, or maybe they used to date and they don't get along anymore, whatever it is, it's causing conflict and distraction at work. So we're going to do this at a time when we have no feelings about it. We're not emotionally engaged in it. And you're going to do some prep work ahead of time. So we have, we'll say Jack and Jill. Okay. So Jack and Jill are bickering at work. They had some kind of a conflict and they won't leave each other alone. And it's made a big uncomfortable bubble in the workplace. So what's the acceptable outcome? We don't want to fire Jack or Jill. They're both good workers. When they're in the game, they're both good workers. The acceptable outcome is that they solve their problem or they stop fighting. It can't happen at work, right? So that's the decision that you're going to make. What's the acceptable outcome? Now you're going to prepare yourself ahead of the meeting for the fears and the ulterior motive. So what's Jack's fear going to be? What's he going to push back about? What's Jill's fear going to be pushed back about? All those kind of things. You're going to prepare for those and have some answers for those ulterior motives. A lot of times I'll see this in, like, let's say we're having a budget cut. So then we have, we've got to cut $500,000 from the budget. So the marketing department is fearful that they're not going to be allowed to advertise, right? And the customer service department is fearful that they're going to lose their program. And then the HR department is fearful that somebody's going to get laid off, right? So you're navigating people through this. You have to be prepared for what their fears are. And remember, turn everybody around, face them forward, remind them of the big picture, and keep them facing forward, okay? So you begin your conflict, your difficult conversation by reassuring. Jack, Jill, thank you for being here this morning. The first thing I want to say is nobody's getting fired today. Pause. Maybe they were worried about getting fired. Maybe they weren't, but now they might be, right? So you begin by reassuring. Nobody's getting fired today, but we are here to talk about this situation that you're having. Now, you look at your watch or you pick up your phone. We have 20 minutes before my next meeting. Let's use that time to figure out a solution to this problem. Otherwise, you may be in this room for 2.5 hours. You might be in this room till 5 o'clock or on the phone with them, right? Now you're going to state the obvious. You two have been having a conflict, and it has escalated to where everybody is upset at work. Okay, so what I've decided is what we need to do here is figure out a way that the two of you can stay in this department and nobody is fired, and we can move forward. What are your ideas? You're being, not confrontational, but you're being very professional and very persistent. You state the obvious and you share or determine, together you can determine an acceptable outcome. Now you want to end the meeting. Now let's say, here's what might happen. Jack might say, but wait a minute, she started it. And then Jill might say, but he always does this. And then you say, you know what, we have to end at 1 o'clock. Let's figure out a way to solve this. You keep bringing them back. You have to end on time. That's another boundary that you can set. Now, if it becomes 1 o'clock and they're still yapping, then you stand up and say, you know what, it's time for my next meeting. How about if I see you back in here Thursday at 7 o'clock? Again, I don't want anybody to be fired because of this. Let's determine an acceptable way to resolve this situation, okay? So you always end on time. And then it's really important to end a difficult conversation with appreciation. You know what? I really appreciate the work the two of you do. You're both important to the organization. I know this is hard for you. I appreciate you helping me come to a solution on it. Okay. Now you can take this blueprint. You're all going to get this in your recording. You can take this blueprint and you can use it for any problem. Any problem. Your 2-year-old, well, I don't know if you can do it with a 2-year-old. Let's do it with a 14-year-old, somebody who's a little bit less ego, right? They're a little bit more grown up. You have your kids that are fighting. You have a situation with your partner. Any conversation that you need to have, you can use this. Now, if you have an underlying issue, it needs to be solved. But it's always, the solutions always begin with the conversation, okay? All right. Now let's have some fun. Let's talk about these awkward situations that we get ourselves into sometimes. Have you ever had one of those times when it's just been awkward? In fact, there was one posted on Fairygodboss. I don't know if it was kind of between awkward and conflict. About 2 weeks ago, somebody posted that, and maybe she's here today, that somebody that she worked with, a man, had commented to her during a Zoom webcast in front of everybody that she should smile more. During a meeting, she should smile more. And that was really awkward. And it felt very uncomfortable. And of course, have you ever had a situation like that where you get put into an awkward moment? And then if you're like me, 2 days later or 4 in the morning, oh, here's what I could have said, right? I could have said this. So this is the problem. We're so surprised by whatever just happened that we have nothing to say. And you know the reason we're surprised? because we would never behave that way. We would never say that to someone. We would never act out that way in front of other people. It's not professional. And so we're so surprised, we're stunned. We have nothing to say. And it takes us hours before we think of a good comeback on it. So I'm going to give you some really great comebacks. Okay. Looks like my screen got stuck. Here's a good one. Let's say, for example, you're at, you're out of quarantine and we're at a networking event, or you're on the phone with somebody and they're just getting a little bit too personal. They're telling you too much. When a break comes up in the conversation, Jane, it's been so nice talking to you. I don't want to monopolize your time. I know there are a lot of other people you want to talk to. Good luck with that hip replacement. Turn and walk away. I don't want to monopolize your time. Okay. Now, what about people who have an opinion? And people have a lot of opinions right now, right? And isn't it interesting? People with like kind of hostile opinions, they always assume that everybody agrees with them, right? And not everybody agrees with them. So here's a real, sometimes people say things to you, and this is me, this is my response. Like, that's my response. I don't even know what to say to that, right? Here's something you can say. That's an interesting opinion. You're not disagreeing with them. You're not agreeing with them. That's an interesting perspective. Turn and walk away, right? Wow, you've really given me something to think about. So if you can imagine yourself back in your office being in the break room and somebody walks up to you and they just rant something. Well, that's definitely something to think about. Turn and walk away, right? Now, here's something that I have seen come up. I told you that I work with a lot of people in the financial field, the legal field, and the medical field. And those industries, education, medicine, health, law, they're extremely competitive. And what happens is a lot of times people are competing with each other to get a promotion or a partnership. And sometimes some people, the way that they are seen, or they show themselves to be more impressive, is by tearing down the other person. Okay, so let's say that somebody's up for a partnership, you're in the break room getting a cup of tea, and somebody pops over to you and says, you know that John, he is so unprofessional. Did you hear what he did? And you just don't want to get involved in this. You can say, I disagree. I've always found John to be very professional. Turn and walk away. Okay, what if somebody keeps following you down the hall? Geez, this topic is obviously very important to you. Keep walking. And then you can turn around and say, you know what, I don't have time for a debate right now. Speaking of work, we need to get back to work, right? No time for a debate right now. These are really excellent phrases that you can have in your toolbox that can help you get out of an awkward situation. And let me tell you something. It doesn't matter what your title is at work or what your role is in the community. When you handle conflict conversations and awkward situations with a little bit of polish and a little bit of finesse, other people are noticing, and guess what? You're teaching them how to do the same, okay? And here's my favorite one. When you just can't get somebody to stop talking. Now, as you become more of a leader, this doesn't happen to me anymore. People don't stick with me and try to make me adapt to their opinion anymore. But when I had no boundaries, that happened to me a lot. And then this was something that my coach taught me. Fascinating. Excuse me. And just literally leave the space that they're in. But this never happens to me, because I'll say something like, that's an interesting opinion. Excuse me, right? Oh, you've definitely given me something to think about. Because I hold myself in so much more confidence than I used to, I really don't have problems with this anymore, okay? Now, we still have a little bit of time before questions. I put some tips in here that I want to give you, because as I said in the beginning of the call, our time together, being a confident communicator is an essential part of being a great leader. And so these are some of the things that I see that women often struggle with when it comes to confident communication. Notice emotions. I'm going to use the example of the young woman who somebody told her on a webinar, you don't smile enough, okay? I don't think that she's an emotional person, But that comment would make anybody defensive. It would have made me very defensive, okay? And so notice when you get defensive and how you personalize it. Now, I don't know the situation. I don't work for this company and I wasn't there. My intuition tells me that that person who was leading the webcast, who was leading the meeting, was probably really uncomfortable. You know, it's a different skill set to talk into a camera than it is to sit in a room full of people. When you're in a room full of people, you can see their faces, you can see if you're making sense to them, if they're nodding their head or if they're playing on their phone. It's a little bit difficult to gauge that. And so the person might have been a little bit nervous. Maybe they were afraid about what they were presenting and didn't feel confident and looked to that person for a smile and didn't get it. Chances are that's what it was all about, right? So if we had a great comeback to that planned, which we didn't, of course, ahead of time, like saying something like, well, I usually don't smile when I'm doing engineering calculations, or something like, oh, sorry, I didn't know that we were supposed to be, I don't know. I didn't know we were supposed to be engaging happily. I thought we were just supposed to be listening, right? Just some kind of a response that we could have had that would have made him realize, oh, maybe that was a little prickly to say, right? Most people don't think what they're saying is prickly because they're only thinking about themselves, right? So notice that if you tend to get upset and defensive and personalize issues, which we all do, notice that and ask yourself, was that really a personal attack on me, or is it just him being insecure or her being insecure? All right, when you are talking, especially when you're emailing, I notice a lot of women do this in email, but when you're talking at a meeting or an email or with a group, stick to one topic at a time. For some reason, we're organically designed, I think, women to multi-think and multitask. Not everybody is like that. And so when you're in a leadership position, even though you might want to have a tendency to add on to another topic and add on to another topic and then go somewhere else, stick to one topic at a time and stay on topic. We can do multiple things and we can think about multiple things at one time, but in the workplace and even in the community leadership positions, that can make us appear scattered to people that don't think that way, okay? So if you want to appear as a confident communicator, stick to one topic at a time. If you have a thought that comes in, you can write it down. Write it down. Instead of saying, oh, before I forget, okay, we're talking about the budget, but before I forget, can we talk about the fundraiser a year from now? That makes you appear scattered. So just make a note of it so that you don't forget it. Stay on topic. When you're speaking, be specific and clear. Here's something I notice with men and women both when they're speaking. A lot of times it takes them 5 minutes to get to the point, and they say a lot of things like, oh, I just need a minute of your time. I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's no reason to minimize yourself in that way. Being specific and clear. Excuse me. We have a budget cut coming up, or we're having problems with our technology. Instead of saying, oh, I'm really sorry, but we're having problems with our technology, could we just take a minute and talk, right? Could we just take a minute and brainstorm this together? How about this? We'll need to schedule some time to talk about technology. That's been a huge issue lately, right? Be specific and be clear, get to the point. Remember to stand in your space. There's a lot of posturing going on, especially at the higher levels of leadership. So be aware of that tendency to get emotional or defensive or personalized. And when somebody does act a little bit inappropriately, don't shrink back. Stay in your space, okay? I have a couple of videos that I've recorded on that. And here's something that I learned the hard way, and that is to recognize and respect this. When you're a communicator, respect the communication styles of others. Not everybody speaks or thinks. Most people don't speak or think the way that you do. So when you're working in a group of people, you have to respect and recognize their way of leading and talking and communicating. There's a lot of right ways to do things. All right, and finally, remember, when you take on a conflict or you participate in a difficult, challenging situation or conversation, You are modeling how to handle things with style and professionalism to everyone around you. So you're giving all the women around you permission to do the same. So please don't hesitate to do that. And if you've enjoyed this content, if you're not like overwhelmed, I always say people after they have a session with me, they usually have to take a nap or they stay up all night. Hopefully you're very motivated, but let's stay connected. If you've enjoyed this content, you can connect with me on Fairygodboss. I have a great group on Facebook called Monday Morning Mastermind. If you connect with me on Fairygodboss, I'll send you the link. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and look up Leadership Academy for Women. And if you like these tips, there's more than 100 tips just like this in my newest book. It's called Women Lead. I know Sam is going to send you the link to it. When the stores open again, you can get it at any bookstore in the United States and Canada, but of course you can buy it from your favorite online channels right now.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was a really great presentation. And I already saw a bunch of questions come in. So if you have a question, just a reminder, leave it in the Q&A. I saw a few in the chat. Don't worry, I have them. So if they're already there, I'll get to them. But leave them in the Q&A so we can get to as many as possible. So we had this question come in from a few different people. It looks like Sherry and an anonymous attendee are kind of asking similar variations from the same question. But it's essentially, how do you confront a boss when you're not the person who's in charge, but you're just, somebody who's directed under somebody else, but you want to confront them about something, maybe inappropriate behavior. We have one anonymous attendee, unfortunately, her boss is making a lot of comments about her having kids and asking her to actually rethink having kids. So how do you approach your boss in a situation like this, which is extremely uncomfortable?
Extremely inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
So usually, most of the time, when people say things that are inappropriate like that, most of the time they don't realize that it's inappropriate. Okay, so sometimes I would, and that's so Mama Bear, I mean, somebody's talking about my kids and I shouldn't have kids. I can't imagine how defensive that would make me, right? So that would be a little bit difficult for me. I feel like if you went to HR, sometimes you could make the situation worse. But so before going to HR, I might, after I calm down in a non-emotional way, say, it felt like you were saying that it's not appropriate for me to have children. Did I hear you correctly? And I have no idea what they're going to say back to that, but they might begin to stutter and say, oh, that's not what I meant at all. And then you'll have to take it, just so you know, those kind of comments are very hurtful. So we don't have to cry and we don't have to get emotional about it, but sometimes they don't know. Now, if they do know and they continue it, that's definitely an HR situation, okay? But, men are wired differently than women. They don't take things personally. And sometimes they're really surprised to know that they've hurt our feelings.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And especially with a touchy situation like that, if, perhaps there was miscommunication somewhere. It doesn't seem that way from, the note you said, but perhaps there was some sort of miscommunication that you can easily clear up with a simple conversation. But if not, you are going to want to take it one step further and deal with that in the way that it should be dealt with. And then kind of on that same note, Sherry asked a similar question of how do you handle a boss? So again, confronting your boss who doesn't want to address conflict publicly. She only wants to do it privately rather. So I guess, how do you approach a boss who has a very different style of handling conflict than your own?
Okay, so I think what you're saying is the boss wants to handle things privately and you want to handle things more out in the open?
Yeah, I'm not sure what situation that would be, but I guess it would have to do with a business, if you want to talk about the budget with the whole team and the boss only wants to do it maybe in private.
Oh, got it.
That's how I'm taking the question.
Okay. So if it's different than that, you can message me privately and we can talk about that. So I would say something like this. You know what might be a good idea? Maybe we should get some outside input. Instead of saying you're not doing this right, or we shouldn't do this, or I don't like this. You know what I was thinking? Maybe we could get an outside opinion. How would you feel about getting some other members of the team in on this? And then be quiet, and you're going to find out what the fear is. Most likely the fear is, in this case, I'm going to bet you, the fear is, I don't want them to know that I'm not doing a great job. I don't want, everybody in America has this problem. What do other people think of me, right? So a lot of times that's the fear of the leader. They don't want to be judged. So that could be the fear.
Yeah, that's a great advice of just, I want other people's opinions, not kind of confronting, not being aggressive, just, trying to come up with a situation that's best for everyone. We have a question here from Shannon that I really like. She said, great presentation, first of all, but with the rise in virtual communication where you're not speaking face-to-face anymore, how do you avoid accidentally interrupting other people during conversations, and how do you deal with being, interrupted?
Oh, you know what? You can't. You can't. It's just, and especially with some of the things that are delayed. We have a great connection today, so we're good. But I have been on some connections where there is a pause. And one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to apologize, and you also don't want to get upset if somebody interrupts you. It's just, we just say what's true. I didn't actually talk about this today, but one of the best ways to overcome something is admit what the truth is. Sometimes we interrupt each other when there's technology. I mean, that's it. It's not usually intentional. Now, if you're sometimes what can happen is people will talk over you because they're extremely excited about a topic. They're very nervous, or they're very, very outgoing, and maybe you're very, very introverted and you can't get a word out. And what you can say in that is, may I finish? May I finish? Can I have a moment to share my thoughts? You can say something like that. And that's usually a very genuinely kind way to say, hey, asshole. It's just a softer way to do it, right?
Yeah. I think it's also important to look for patterns. If you are the one being interrupted, if it's the same colleague and it's happening over and over and over and over again, that might be something you would like to confront them and talk to them about. But, if it's simply, it happens once or twice because of a bad connection. I mean, I'm sure many of you have been on the webinars. It happens to me all the time with connection issues. So I don't think it's coming from a place of malice. It's probably just coming from a place of technical difficulties at this point.
Or just somebody could be very nervous, but please don't apologize. Don't say, oh, sorry, oh, sorry, oh, sorry, oh, sorry. You go. Don't do that. Just say, we have some tech difficulties. Go ahead.
Exactly.
Like that.
Looks like we're almost out of time, but I want to get to one more question that I like from an anonymous attendee here. They said, have you ever been in a situation where a colleague is quick to use passive aggression to make stinging remarks long after the conflict? They said, my colleague has dismissed my multiple attempts at reconciliation, and I'm afraid it's going to stay like this.
Yep, that's all about them. I have dealt with that before, and I've worked in companies where I've dealt with that before, where they have had a person who's just so unhappy that it's their role to make everybody unhappy. It's not about you, it's about them. And it's a decision that has to be made. So some things that you can say that are non-emotional, you can say, that's interesting. I thought we put that behind us. Is that still bothering you? Right? You can say something like that, or you can say, wait, did you just say this? Because that's what it sounded like you said. And they might say yes. And you'd be like, ow, that really hurt me. I'm just going to have to go outside and shake that off. And sometimes you can really surprise them when you come in a place of confidence like that. Don't say you're sorry. Remember, it's about them. And you might need to look for another job. And by the way, if you do have somebody that works with you that's so uncomfortable that you have to quit, be sure that you let the HR department know when you have your exit interview. It's never going to be fixed if somebody doesn't say anything. To be honest, I found the workplace pretty toxic. I really like the work, but the workplace is toxic, so I'm moving on.
Yeah, I'd also suggest if there's a mediator involved, if this is a coworker who's directly on your team and you have a manager maybe who's managing both of you, perhaps bring that up in a private conversation to see if there's anything that the entire team can kind of deal with going forward to make the relationship better. But again, sometimes there is just a rotten egg that it just wants to be rotten. Well, thank you so much to Beth, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thanks for spending the time with us. It was a really great presentation, really helpful tips, and appreciate you being here.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a very confident rest of your week.
Yes. Stay safe.
Bye,
Bye.
Samantha.